All right, starting my time now. The government affirms the motion, this House believes in aliens. First, some definitions. By believe, we mean the act as if this thing may exist. We define an alien as any extraterrestrial life forms, any living being that did not originate on Earth. This House is a rational actor with a reasonable scientific background in relevant areas such as astrophysics and biology. Clarification here, believing in aliens does not necessarily mean that you believe in all aliens, such as the Greys, or are otherwise a conspiracy theorist. It simply means that you believe there are other living beings outside the boundaries of Earth. It has nothing to do with whether they have visited Earth or influenced its history. Our framework here should be utilitarianism, or what is the net benefit for society. Our first contention is scientific logic. So, from a purely scientific and inductive framework, it does make sense that some kind of alien life exists. Planets with Earth-like conditions are known to exist in quantities that exceed any person's ability to compute. NASA estimates that as many as 100 quintillion such planets, Earth-like analogs, exist in the Milky Way. It logically follows through sheer statistics that other planets would bear life just as Earth have if conditions are similar. Even in our own solar system, NASA rovers have found that our next door neighbor, Mars, once had the conditions that could have supported life long ago, and there is strong evidence that biological precursors exist on Pluto. Not believing in the statistical and chemical logic undermines the foundations of science. Science can't always produce direct evidence, but a logical framework heavily implies consistent outcomes. At least some life-friendly planets must bear life. So what are the impacts here? In the opposition world, you're likely to see some level of undermining science and creating a cognitive dissonance with science that could lead to a decrease in scientific funding. In a government world, there is a clear support of science and support of scientific logic. Our second contention revolves around curbing anthrochauvinism. So, anthrochauvinism is the biased belief in human supremacy and the tendency to interpret the world through a primarily human lens. We can see anthrochauvinism in how people underestimate the intelligence and moral value of animals, including human relatives and ancestors such as Neanderthals, who are often regarded as brutish in popular depictions, but were in fact as advanced as contemporary humans. On a cosmological level, it is anthrochauvinist to assume that we are the sole life forms in the universe, and it cultivates a species-wide arrogance. Look to medieval Christian metaphysical doctrines, for instance, which placed humans at the top of the so-called great chain of being. This encourages humans to see themselves as superior to the other life forms and special in and of themselves. It makes Earth special because they see it as a cosmic Garden of Eden. Anthrochauvinism encourages overestimation of human importance, violence towards non-human life forms, and general arrogance. Anthrochauvinism also morally encourages humans to ignore impacts towards non-human entities, namely animals and ecosystems. Yeah.
How can we commit violence on a species we have never seen and has never contacted us?
It's not so much about whether or not we're committing violence on aliens. It's more so about the ideology that like humans are a unique species in the universe and we can do things that no one else can. And that leads to an idea of human superiority, which I'm about to explain even more, can have a negative impact impacts on non-human entities such as animals and ecosystems. So moving back into case, anthrochauvinism also morally encourages humans to ignore impacts towards non-human entities, namely animals and ecosystems. It is the primary justification for violence against animals and for pollution without human effects. It also means that environmental destruction registers less as a moral impact in the mind of the anthrochauvinist. Ergo, anthrochauvinism encourages violence towards animals and environmental destruction. Acknowledging that humans are not alone in the universe, that we are not necessarily a unique species, goes against anthrochauvinism, and this is an obvious net good because we are going to see an increase in animal rights and the rights of things that aren't human. This also encourages preservation of the environment and planetary systems. Now moving on to our third contention of scientific advancement. So just as some quick prior examples of how believing in space and our ability to get to space has been good for humanity. We often hear about things like fridges or microwaves, but the actual examples are so much more important. In the race to get to the moon, we developed a huge amount of new technology. For example, the food safety technology of the era wasn't up to the task, so NASA and Pillsbury developed a new system for verifying safe manufacturing processes. For the past couple of decades, the US government has required meat, poultry, seafood, and juice producers to use the manufacturing processes in that verification system to ensure safe food for all Americans. Furthermore, the shock absorbers developed led to our are now used to reinforce hundreds of buildings, bridges, and other structures around the world, particularly in quake-prone regions. It also led to the technology for rechargeable hearing aids. Innovation is clearly a good thing, and we can see from history that engaging the world beyond Earth leads to innovation. So why is the innovation we get from thinking about aliens better than the innovation we're currently seeing in the world, which is largely centered around technology and artificial intelligence? When we're thinking about space, the key issue tends to be how do humans survive in new arenas and new contexts? This means that the innovation around aliens is far more likely to have direct positive impacts on human life. For example, the SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Life Institute, also discovered the best radio frequency to communicate in space because it was trying to search for aliens and thus better prepared us for future space exploration in the modern era. So the impact here is that we're going to see more advanced technology and more science funding, leading to a higher quality of life for all people if we make aliens a priority. Once again, just want to reiterate that this is a unique impact on our side because the impacts that we get from engaging with the ideas of aliens are unique to any other type of innovation. When we're thinking about technology, we tend to be thinking about, like, say, how can humans produce more? How can it change the way we work, et cetera, et cetera. However, when we're thinking about how to explore other territories and we're thinking about how to interact with new species, that technology is going to be largely focused around keeping humans safe in different climates and improving like conversational, communicative technology. That is going to allow us to be more adaptive to the world around us and is going to allow us better communication with the world around us. Therefore, you're going to prefer this innovation over any other type of innovation. For all of these reasons, I could not be prouder to propose this motion, and thank you all for your time.
The judges thank the Prime Minister and call on the Leader of Opposition to give the first opposition speech of the round, not to exceed 8 minutes. Hear, hear.
Am I visible and audible? Awesome. This will be an 8-minute speech. Okay. Let's start in 3, 2. Side proposition lost this debate when they didn't actually debate the motion. I'll be moving on to the framing and going into this really clearly, but I think side proposition started on the wrong footing, and this will be a really big strategic debate as we look further down the bench. I'll first be moving on in the speech to 3 things. I'll firstly move on to framing and quibbles about what this debate actually looks like. Secondly, I'll be responding to the arguments we heard from side government. And then finally, we'll be giving you 2 arguments of our own. But firstly on framing, what do we think are aliens? We would contest this understanding that government tells us. According to popular understanding, we would tell you that aliens are those organisms that possess an intelligence level similar to or surpassing that of humans. We think that this is the most fair assumption for this debate, as if we define aliens as life on other planets, we've already seen fossilized bacteria hurtling through space on asteroids. If this was the case and their interpretation was correct, we would not be having this debate at all. So we think our interpretation is better. Secondly, government tells you that if we believe in aliens, that just means we act if it's true. We believe that the Earth is not round, not because we assume it, but because we've proven it extensively. We disagree with this interpretation that by voting for side government, that we're just acting as if it's true. They need to prove that it's true. Similarly, if we believed in aliens, we need to be 100% certain that aliens exist. To believe is defined by Merriam-Webster as to consider to be true. Truth is that which is objective and empirically demonstrable. Truth is most obtained through repetitions of the scientific method in which we prove a phenomenon beyond a shadow of a doubt through analysis and empirical data. Then thirdly, what are the burdens in this debate? In order to win this debate, we don't need to disprove aliens' existence. Theology is a good example of this. If you don't believe in God, you don't have to disprove that God exists. You can be agnostic, concluding that there isn't enough evidence to know. Therefore, in order for side proposition to win, they must prove beyond a doubt that aliens exist. Otherwise, a reasonable actor could always adopt the belief that there is not enough evidence and chose not to believe. Realize that side government has this burden of proof. We do not. Side opposition only needs to cast significant doubt. I finally just want to get rid of this from the get-go, this idea of utilitarian framing, because it absolutely makes no sense. This motion didn't read, a world where this house believes in aliens is good, right? This motion wasn't asking whether we believe that a world that believed in aliens was a good thing. The only thing that we actually needed to talk about is whether this house believes in aliens. They need to prove why we should believe in aliens, why there's enough evidence for us to believe in aliens, insofar as we contend on opposition that we do not believe in aliens. Moving on to their case. They tell you in their first argument that it creates science, right? And allows us to have, like if it logically follows that there's lots of life and there's lots of planets, there's planets that exist that could have life. First response here, this is a logical fallacy coming straight from said government. It's called the argument from ignorance. Just because something could possibly exist doesn't mean it does. Just because the earth could be flat doesn't mean it's 100% true. We'll expand on this more on our third argument. They tell you that this increases spending in science. I'm not sure specifically why this is necessarily true. They really needed to warrant this out a little bit more. Secondly, and again, that's the utilitarian framing, that's not really topical. The second argument was about combating anthropochauvinism. The first and easiest response we can make here is that if we are this house, have the fiat to believe that aliens exist, we in opposition also have that similar fiat power to assume that humans have this mindset that they aren't superior to other life forms or animals, etc., right? We could also absolutely address anthropochauvinism in different, more effective ways, right? Directly advocating for animal rights in the environment, because if they have that power to make the mindsets of individuals believe that aliens exist, we certainly have that fiat power on our side of the house. The second response we have here, though, is that we cannot commit violence, as sworn correctly identified in the POI. We can't commit violence against a species we have never seen. Even if they claim it's only about the mindset only, we find it incredibly suspect that disbelief in aliens is the suggest some obvious alternative causes. For example, the fact that we are empathetically limited, we find it incredibly suspect that disbelief in aliens is the sole contributor to lack of caring about the environment and animals. We would suggest some obvious alternative causes. For example, the fact that we're empathetically limited to only consider things from the human perspective, or the fact that evolutionarily we are inclined to look after our own good. Fourth side proposition to prove that disbelief in aliens is the primary cause of not caring about animals. Finally, this idea about innovation. As we said already, we already have lots of money going into interspecies communication with SETI. Just last November, SETI received $200 million into their studies. Over 990 private firms have consistently funded this research. We don't need government recognition here. That's like not non-unique impact. Additionally, let's move on to contention one. Life is extremely unlikely in space. The conditions necessary for life to rise are extremely rare. We have three different reasons. Firstly, complex organic molecules like carbon are necessary for life forms to exist, yet a vast majority of universes don't have this carbon. Secondly, universes need suitable planetary environments where water can form, where temperatures are moderate and atmospheres can exist for life. This isn't very common. Remember the Goldilocks thing. Earth is very unique in that aspect. Thirdly, alien life needs to go through multiple bottleneck effects and great filters. There's 6 of these. Firstly, the formation of first self-replicating molecules from non-living matter. They have to prove that these little molecules, these atoms all over, just started turning into self-replicating DNA, etc., right? We still don't even know how this works on Earth, by the way. We shouldn't assume that it happens anywhere else. The second filter, the accumulation of complex organic molecules that serve as the building blocks of life. How do we have billions of strands of DNA in our body from nothing? How do we have 20 different amino acids that literally code all of life? How do we have organisms that created means to make their own energy like chloroplasts and mitochondria? We still don't know that too. Thirdly, a living block of life like cells needs to be created, a unit of life, in order to enable cell messaging and chemicals messaging throughout the body. Fourthly, large-scale events that cause extinction events must also not happen. Things like meteor showers, things like black holes. Think about even the Earth, about dinosaurs. Fifthly, they need to develop consciousness and the ability to perceive the self. Again, we still don't know how humans understand their selves and consciousness. Sixthly, there needs to not be resource depletion so that this life doesn't already just die and extinct. Contention 2 is that even if you did buy that alien life was probable, we present to you the Fermi paradox. As Enrico Fermi once remarked, where is everyone? The idea of the Fermi paradox is that despite the vast amount of planets and universes where life could exist in the observable universe, we have yet to discover it. A couple of reasons why this is true. Firstly, we've already launched many programs to try to discover aliens, and yet none of them have returned the slightest shred of evidence. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence program was launched 40 years ago, and astronomical surveys have conducted for more than a century. Secondly, there's an absolute lack of physical evidence to determine this fact. Thirdly, we may not even have the technology to discover aliens and the species if they exist. But fourthly and finally, the idea of Occam's razor. In the absence of adequate evidence, we ought to believe in the simplest solution, the one with the least moving parts, and that will always be a disbelief in aliens. But more than that, in order to believe that aliens are true, this house would have to adopt a major paradigm shift against truth, against science, against rationality, against the most crucial aspects of our science society today. If we choose to believe in aliens, we are free to believe absolutely anything without any substantial evidence. Insofar as we believe in the necessity of truth in an era where truth is rapidly disappearing, we as this house ought to reject unfounded beliefs altogether. We're so proud to oppose.
The judges thank the leader of opposition for their remarks and call on the member of government to deliver the next speech of the round not to exceed 8 minutes. Hear, hear.
All right, off-time roadmap. Everyone okay with that? Cool. So firstly, going to be addressing the opposition's framing and then going back into the op case and then back into the gov case. Time starts in 3, 2, 1. So firstly, the opposition gives you this framing about aliens, that the popular definition of aliens means that they're as intelligent, if not more intelligent than humans. This clearly doesn't make sense because say in the movie Aliens, the aliens are not as intelligent or more intelligent than humans. And aliens in Star Wars some of them are more intelligent than humans, others aren't. So the things that we call aliens don't just include things that are as intelligent as aliens, as humans, or more. Yes, the aliens that we have conspiracy theories about, such as the Greys arriving to Earth, are that, but other aliens in popular fiction and in general scientific understanding aren't that. SETI is searching for extraterrestrial intelligence, but it's also searching for, as the opposition brought up, simple biomolecules that might show evidence of something else being there. That is considered alien life too. There's no way this definition is abusive. Aliens, the term alien means other, as in other life form. It doesn't have to be more intelligent. It's just life. Also, we've still warranted out how through sheer statistics, this is going to be a reasonable thing. And again, on the burden of proof, they say that they don't need to disprove the presence of aliens. We simply prove that it's a reasonable thing to believe, that there's a factual evidence to believe, and they need to prove that it's an unreasonable thing to believe, that it doesn't make sense. So now going into the opposition case, they bring up first the contention that life is unlikely, that there's all of these barriers to life. But think about that in the context of Earth. Apply those barriers to Earth. The fact that life exists on Earth implies that it's past those barriers, which therefore implies it's possible to pass those barriers. And as we warranted out in our first contention, there are a lot of Earth-like planets out there. There are literally more than any human being can count or conceptualize, more in every galaxy than we will ever possibly see. The reason the Fermi paradox exists as an idea is because everyone understands on some intuitive level it makes sense for aliens, for other life forms to exist on other planets if they are Earth-like or even more suitable to Earth. So the question is, why haven't we found the evidence? Occam's razor does not say the lack of evidence means it doesn't exist. It says in this context, the lack of evidence means it's hard to find evidence. Occam's razor does not always point to things not existing. It points to science being hard. The fact that we have these barriers and we know about them simply demonstrates that the barriers were passed on Earth and can logically be passed somewhere else. They are unlikely to be passed, but the universe is so big, it outweighs any small possibilities. It is unlikely that any given person will be born, but there are enough people that those people are born. It is unlikely that life formed on Earth, and yet it did because there are billions, quintillions of Earth-like planets, and one of them got lucky. It is chauvinistic and absurd to assume we are the only planet in the entire universe that got lucky. And contention 2, the Fermi paradox. This is again the same concept. The Fermi paradox is the question of why isn't there other life? Why aren't we seeing it? So they give you this logic about Occam's razor, that the lack of evidence implies a lack of existence, but it actually doesn't. That's not how science works. Scientists have searched for many things for more than 40 years, and it would be absurd to assume that simply because we haven't found direct concrete evidence of something existing for 40 years means it doesn't exist. As they bring up, we have found simple biomolecules on asteroids, and we have found the conditions to cause life on many other planets. It would in fact be absurd to assume that none of those planets would ever have whatever special sauce made Earth unique to give rise to life, because there's no evidence of any kind of special sauce or unique thing that Earth has that would logically imply it is the only planet that could possibly support life. There are so many planets in the universe, it is just absurd to assume we are the only special one. The Fermi paradox is an emotional reaction to the fact that this logically doesn't make sense. The reason we haven't found evidence is because space is huge. Light takes a very long time. Sure.
What is the source for and how many planets actually exist that we have surveyed?
It's impossible to actually to count how many planets we have surveyed. It's also not necessary. We already gave you in our first speech, the NASA statistic that NASA itself surveyed more than 100 or estimated the existence of more than 100 quintillion Earth-like planets in the Milky Way. Within near Earth space, we can point to a couple billion Earth-like planets. It's literally impossible to count all of these. It's also not important to count exactly how many Earth-like planets there are in the universe. That doesn't matter. The universe is so big, no one can possibly count them. It's not relevant to this debate. We're pointing out the universe is so large, if there's even one other planet that hosts some kind of extraterrestrial life, the government wins. And we're saying it's so big, it is just statistically highly likely that that's happened. Because there is no evidence, the opposition presides, that Earth is by necessity uniquely capable of supporting life, or that there's any given reason that Earth is the only one to support life. All they point to is this lack of evidence, and we have already given you evidence that it's possible and highly likely that aliens exist. And as they said, we have found evidence of alien microbes on asteroids, which implies complex biomolecules. The first barrier they bring up is passed repeatedly on other terrestrial objects. And ergo, it is logically following from that, we can assume it is highly possible that aliens will form. And if it's highly possible for something to happen in a universe this big, it's almost improbable, impossible that it didn't happen. Now, going back into the government case. On Con 1 about scientific logic, they call this a logical fallacy. It's an argument for ignorance. It's not ignorance, it's statistics. It's simple probability. We have already proven to you this is highly possible. They have given you evidence that it is highly possible for biomolecules to form on other objects than Earth. And they have presented no specific reason why they Earth. No, I have a lot to get through. They giving you no specific reason on why this happened on Earth and not other similar conditions. It's scientific logic that similar conditions will repeat similar outcomes. That's the basis of all science and all scientific experiments, repeatability. So Earth is essentially a scientific experiment. Why hasn't it happened yet? Well, we don't know exactly yet, but there's a lot of scientific experiments that don't have full information yet. Quantum physics, look at quantum physics, for example. We don't know why every quantum physical event happens, but we know there is an underlying logic to it, and there is no unique element of Earth. There's no magic thing on Earth that made life happen that doesn't happen on other similar planets. We haven't seen direct evidence. We haven't seen a picture of an alien. That doesn't mean it's illogical to assume they exist. It's a logical fallacy to assume that because there is no direct, obvious evidence, somehow scientific paradigms about physics and chemistry don't hold true in this universe. They say other universes do not have these conditions. I assume they mean here galaxies, but it's impossible to speak of the conditions in other galaxies aside from assuming that they're basically the same because we're all governed under the same laws of physics. So if life arose on this planet under these laws of physics as we understand them with these chemical elements in place, other planets that have the same laws of physics and same chemical elements and same Goldilocks zone, and that's what Earth-like analog means, remembers. It is planets that are in the Goldilocks zone and have lots of carbon and are Earth-sized or larger, over 100 quintillion in just this galaxy. And on the topic of scientific funding, we are looking to this house believing in aliens. So if this house believes in aliens, it's more likely to support politically scientific funding and be part of a society or part of a community that supports scientific funding based on the belief that aliens do exist and we ought to look for them as a logical conclusion of that. On to contention 2 about anthrochauvinism. They say that they have fiat to address this, which no, they don't. A, the government is the only real side that actually has fiat to address things or assume feasibility on mechanisms. That's called government fiat. There's no opposition fiat. And B, they don't give any mechanism on how you could address chauvinism aside from other things that aren't covered in the motion, like advocacy for animal rights. Advocacy for animal rights is great. It's not what we're debating. We're not talking about that. We are talking about an attitude among humans that they are somehow special in the universe, that this is arrogant. So even if you do buy that this won't encourage violence toward animals, which they completely missed in their POI. They asked about violence toward aliens. This is about violence toward animals. Even if you buy that, you still buy our point about environmental destruction, which they never rebutted, that anthrochauvinism encourages people to care only about humans and therefore not about things that aren't human, like ecosystems, that in some framings are living beings because complex systems are what living beings are and still deserve protection, and animal rights as well as an extension of environmental protection. Anthrochauvinism is an attitude based on the human belief that we are alone, that we are on the crowning position of the great chain of being. If you look back to those theological justifications, I'm about to go into grace period, you see that they're founded on the belief that Earth is the only planet that exists. The Garden of Eden, the only planet that exists, that we are the children of God specifically, that he made us special, which is clearly untrue. The belief in aliens would completely disprove and negate this attitude to human supremacy because it destroys this idea that we are somehow the special people created in the universe. And then on our contention 3 about scientific advancement, they just say a lot of money is going into this, but we have clearly warranted you why more money goes into things like SETI because of the belief that aliens exist and therefore ought to be searched for. And we've given you examples with the space race, which future space exploration, in which this belief clearly leads to positive impacts in terms of funding. They don't have as much funding on their side as we do on ours. It is simply impossible to believe otherwise that not believing in aliens would encourage more funding for scientific exploration. Thank you.
The judges thank the member of government and call on the member of opposition to give the last constructive speech of the round, not to exceed 8 minutes. Hear, hear.
Once again, I'm Soren Jensen. We will be speaking second for the opposition. We never needed to prove that or disprove that aliens exist. All we needed to do was tell you that there's not enough evidence to believe. Insofar as they conceded to this burden analysis in the second speech, especially our burden analysis about agnosticism, we are still left with this as the only burden of the negation in this round. Let's talk about intelligence. First of all, they've completely sandbagged the definition of what intelligence is and allowed us to contradict their own analysis and examples. Take, for example, SETI, which stands for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, meaning not just bacteria or the presence of biochemical molecules, contrary to what they said about SETI. The reason that SETI is still looking for intelligence is because we haven't found it yet. Yes, we found biomolecules. Yes, we found fossils, but that isn't life, and that certainly isn't aliens. Let's talk about this appeal to pop culture, that aliens in Star Wars are not as intelligent as us. Obviously, this holds no real ground in terms of an evidence-based debate or anything about logic. Of course, this is purely entertainment. But semantically, this isn't even true or even scientifically. The aliens in Star Wars were still very intelligent compared to bacteria and even some of the animals that we see on Earth. They had complete ability to make rational decisions. I mean, like, we can talk about Star Wars all day long, but I really don't think that's necessary to disprove this notion that aliens semantically are not just living organisms, but at least have some standard of intelligence which has not been reached yet. Again, this is all about education. We wouldn't be having this debate if we already discovered aliens, and thus this standard is very, very reasonable and in line with what SETI and other organizations have already assumed it to be. But in addition, they completely dropped our framing about how this isn't a debate of net benefits, that it was a debate about whether there's enough logical evidence to say as a truth, as a completely provable idea, that aliens exist. So we can completely disregard all their analysis about how it's beneficial to believe that aliens exist, because we ought not make our judgments on truth based off whether it's beneficial. We can obviously be wrong in this sense, and this contradicts their idea of science. We don't make assumptions in science just because it fits our predictions. This goes against the idea of science in and of itself. We do not make our evidence fit our assumptions, our hypotheses. It's the other way around. Evidence should always, evidence should always support our hypothesis, not the other way around. That being said, let's talk about probability. Theirs is the fallacy that James mentioned, the appeal from ignorance. Let's demonstrate how this appeal to statistics makes no sense. In terms of probability, if we do buy the claim that we've surveyed 100 quintillion planets according to side proposition, and yet we still only know about one planet with life that we would define as intelligent, being Earth, the probability of aliens existing is 1 out of 100 quintillion, as increasing every single second that NASA continues to survey new planets. It's true that in science, we make assumptions sometimes when it comes to statistics, that we don't necessarily have to prove something to be true 100% of the time, because that might not be possible because of, issues like, for example, human error or statistical or even technical error. However, science concludes on high probabilities, often exceeding 95% with minimal margin of error. This is a basic tenet of science. We do not make conclusions based on 1 over 100 quintillion. This has never been done in the history of science. If anything, turn their argument about defunding the science programs, if we even are to consider the utilitarian benefits in this debate, because as James mentioned in the closing remarks of the very first speech from opposition, to adopt the belief that aliens exist is to paradigm shift away from rationality, away from the principles of the scientific method, and ultimately would discourage science funding even more than they claim a belief, or rather a disbelief in aliens currently does. But even more on science. If anything, you can turn this argument a second time, because their side wastes spending on scientific research that has an infinite small probability of being true, instead of focusing on real science that actually affects the human population. There's over $200 million that are going into SETI each year, while human conditions and disorders continue to negatively affect our lives. Let's talk about utilitarianism. There is so much left to do in the world of science to better human life. Why are we not doing that? Even their own framework concedes that they are anthro-chauvinist. Utilitarianism is not about the pleasure of aliens. It's about the pleasure of humans. It's a theory of human morality. That is, side proposition needs to pick a side. Either they are anthro-chauvinist or they are not anthro-chauvinist. Pick one. But let's talk about anthro-chauvinism. They never proved to you, which we made very clear was their burden in James's first speech, that disbelief in aliens is the primary cause of not caring about animals or the environment. We suggested to you 2 very probable alternative causes, which they wholeheartedly ignored. That being the evolutionary impulse. That is, that we have an evolutionary advantage in not caring about other animals and prioritizing us as the sole organisms in the universe. Secondarily, that we simply do not have the ability ability to empathize and with other organisms because of the confines of our rationality. We are humans. We cannot imagine what it's like to be an animal. We cannot get inside their heads. They've completely ignored this. And insofar as we contend logically that these two are a much greater reason that failure to care for animals in the environment exists, we still would contend that their anthro-chauvinism point is either not affected by disbelief or belief in aliens, or even worsened under their side by their conflicting stance on utilitarianism as it pertains to whether or not we care about human pleasure. That is, even if we assumed aliens did exist, they would be so far away from us that it wouldn't even force us to change our behaviors on Earth, as they have no control over this. This completely takes out the fundamental assumption of their point that disbelief in aliens would be worldview changing to the people on Earth, but insofar as it doesn't represent a credible threat against our behaviors, we're unlikely to change our behaviors in favor of benefiting animals or not. They've done no legwork here. We've ultimately disproved in multiple ways why their side worsens anthro-chauvinism, if anything, or does nothing. That being said, they have zero offense in this round. As so far as we in debate try to prove things with logical evidence and also high probabilities, but insofar as side proposition has fundamentally violated the principles of not only science but also debate by trying to claim things based on pure speculation and lack of evidence, this is a classic appeal from ignorance fallacy. In any other context, this would be absolutely regarded. But instead, let's look at the rhetoric of side proposition. There are so many planets that could have aliens on them, and yet why haven't we found them? This is quite precisely the argument that James presented to you, the second argument about the Fermi paradox. If life is so probable, why haven't we found it yet? Side proposition has not addressed this argument. They hold again a conflicting position. They simultaneously claim that life is incredibly probable and simultaneously believe that life hasn't happened yet, or at least that we haven't found it yet, in over 100 quintillion instances of trying to search. This makes zero sense. We've had the SETI program for over 40 years with hundreds of millions of dollars of funding. We've had astronomical surveys, as they say, in the magnitudes of the quintillions, which is not even an imaginable number. How can we even conclude that there will be anything when the probability is so infinitesimally low? But on the idea of Occam's razor, it's not about like how science is hard, as the second speaker talks about. It's a philosophy for how we ought to behave in order to produce the best consequences. So if you do buy their framework of utilitarianism, we're clearly winning under Occam's razor here, which states that in the absence of adequate evidence, we ought to believe in the simplest solution, the one with the least moving parts. And by nature, a belief in aliens will only increase the complexity of our beliefs, making it harder to conduct scientific research, harder to conduct policy, and harder to plan and plan and plan and plan for ultimately something that may not even be true and probably isn't true based on our own scientific evidence. That will always be a disbelief in aliens. As we've said, in order to believe that aliens are true, this House would need to adopt a major paradigm shift against truth, against science, against rationality, against the most crucial aspects of our society today. Insofar as we believe in the necessity of truth in an era where truth is rapidly disappearing in the debate space and also in the scientific community, we as this House ought to reject unfounded beliefs altogether.
The judges thank the member of opposition and call on the leader of opposition to give the first rebuttal speech of the debate, not to exceed 4 minutes. Hear, hear.
Am I visible and audible? Awesome. 4-minute speech. In the last 20 minutes, side proposition conceded so many crucial things, which makes this a really easy, clean ballot for side opposition. First, in framing, they firstly conceded that we are arguing about aliens as intelligent life, right? All of their own link work and analysis required a definition of aliens as intelligent life. But secondly, we already told you we wouldn't be having this debate if we took their interpretation. The second thing they crucially conceded was this net benefits idea. Their second speaker gave you 0 seconds on this idea of the weighing mechanism, that we are debating not about whether it's a good idea to adopt the belief that aliens exist, but rather that do we have enough evidence, do we have enough logical reasoning to believe scientifically that aliens are absolutely exist as a truth. In their last speech, they never contested our weighing mechanism. Don't let them contested our conceded framing. Don't give them access to things like anthro-chauvinism and things like science funding. Insofar as they drop their net benefits analysis, they lose all access to all their tangible benefits. But even if you didn't buy that weighing, right, Soren literally gave you like 3 minutes about how like anthro-chauvinism utilitarianism gets worse on their side, things about science fighting, how literally their own advocacy of util literally harms anthrochauvinism because it places humans at the center of the universe. Finally, and most important thing on framing, they conceded the burdens analysis I gave you nearly 30 minutes ago and has sworn conceded. Crucially, we don't need to prove on side opposition that aliens don't exist. That's not our job. We only needed to provide enough doubt that a reasonable person didn't need to make that absolute assumption, that absolute truth, right? Because if you don't believe that God is real, you don't need to know for an absolute truth that God isn't real. You can still be agnostic, even if you had just a little bit of doubt. Side opposition only contends that even if there's a tiny bit of doubt, if there's no absolute truth, then we cannot, as this house, assume that there is some factualness to this claim. Now, there are two voters in this debate. The first one is reasonable doubt. Remember, we gave you so many different reasons why. We gave you 3 different weighing mechanisms and analysis, but we're only going to talk about the third one, which is bottlenecks, because we got 0 responses from side government about these bottlenecks. The first one was this idea of, self-replicating molecules that can actually expand and go again and again and again. Second one was about the accumulation of complex molecules as the building blocks of life. Thirdly was like the living blocks of cells that could sell message with chemicals with other living particles. Fourthly was preventing large-scale events that cause extinction events, think meteor showers and black holes. Fifthly, developing consciousness and the ability to perceive the self. Sixthly, the resource depletion of this life. We gave you 6 different reasons. Every single one of them were cold conceded. It's pretty easy. You can vote for side opposition. 6 independent reasons why there's enough doubt that life can exist. The second voter here is scientific methodology. Every single claim that proposition has made in this round has been contradictory to science itself. We're willing to concede that science might be a game of probability, but it's a game of high probabilities. In their arguments, they can pit multiple logical fallacies, such as the appeal to ignorance, as we've told you very clearly down the bench. We've given you 2 ways in which how we turn these arguments. We firstly told you that this house, adopting a belief that is scientifically unaccounted for, casts much more doubt over science, decreasing science funding more than disbelief in aliens ever possibly could. The second thing we told you then was that funding for alien research takes away for actual real research that affects human lives, that took away from the well-being of individuals. On anthropocentrism, we told you that, again, they were already anthropocentrists by advocating in the philosophy of utilitarianism, which only focuses on the pleasure of humans. We did that debate. You guys probably know the warrants there. But secondly, there are significant alternative causes, which they also never responded to. Don't allow them to make new arguments about here when we already gave you 2 different reasons why humans might think that there's a center of the universe, not because they don't believe aliens exist. Whether you care about net benefits, whether you care about the pursuit of truth, everything they told you went in the flight of science. We're winning in both ways. If you're for science, if you're for human flourishing, for straightforward and consistent argumentation, we've provided enough doubt that this isn't a rational belief to hold as an absolute truth we're so proud to oppose.
The judges thank the leader of opposition and call finally on the prime minister to give the last rebuttal speech of the round, not to exceed 5 minutes. Hear, hear.
All right, starting my time now. Okay, so I'm just going to go over a few of the main issues and voters in this round. Starting off with this issue about what's an alien. First off, there's no point in debating whether or not we should believe in the idea that there's any life whatsoever. We agree with that because we've already found some forms of bacteria or whatever. So on some level, yes, some level of intelligence and communication ability. But now going on to their burden, do we have to prove that aliens exist? So belief doesn't necessarily require existence. Religion is a really great example of this. They talk about agnosticism, about how if you don't have any doubt whatsoever, if you have any doubt whatsoever, then you can just not believe in the thing. However, religion is still an example of how it is very much a human tendency to believe in things that we don't necessarily have concrete answers. Yeah.
We'll stop time at...
This is a new line of argumentation. It was dropped in the 2.
Yeah, this argument...
I have it on my flow for the 2, but of course I'll leave that up to judges' discretion. Okay. Because the existence of... Okay. So now moving into, do we prove that aliens... beyond reasonable doubt, even if you buy that burden that side opposition gives you, do we prove that aliens exist? Yes, we do. Okay, so they talk about aliens not existing in 3 ways. A logical fallacy, these 6 bottlenecks, and the Fermi paradox. I'm going to go through and talk about why all of them don't apply to this round. First off on the logical paradox being bad. It is completely logical to
can you pause time? Do you need to get a drink of water? It's okay. Yes.
You're
You're
muted.
still muted.
I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
Oh, so sorry. Okay. What's the last thing you heard?
Oh, about religion, and they had a POO, and it's under judge's discretion.
Oh, okay. So then I
It
think I
won't
was
count
at.
against you. Don't worry about it. I just want to make sure
No,
you
don't
have
worry.
a chance to get water and stuff.
Oh,
Okay.
thanks so much. Okay. Okay, so moving on to my flow after that. Okay, beyond reasonable doubt, even if you buy that burden, do we prove that aliens exist? Yes, we do. They talk about aliens not existing in three ways: a logical fallacy, the six bottlenecks, and the Fermi paradox. I'm going to go through all of them and talk about why they aren't necessarily relevant to this round. First, on this idea of the logical paradox being bad. It is completely logical to assume physical consistency. It would be illogical to prove that the formation of life is somehow special or did not happen. It is logical to assume, for instance, life forms can survive on other parts of Earth, that all planets are spherical, even the ones that we cannot see, and so on. It is logical to believe in individual quarks existing, even if they have not individually been observed. We extend physical laws all of the time. This is not at all unique, and it is a wildly common scientific practice. This is just science once again. Okay, now moving on to these bottlenecks that they present. First off, we found evidence in the past few years of some of these bottlenecks being moved past. It's incredibly reasonable to assume with all human logic that if we've passed some bottlenecks, we can easily pass others. Furthermore, bottlenecks are not necessarily reasons. They are simply statements of scientific fact that bottlenecks exist. We're not going to disprove these bottlenecks because these bottlenecks are true. We have to prove is that these bottlenecks either don't matter or have been passed, or rather that it is logical to assume that bottlenecks can be passed on other planes, and given the preponderance of plants, very much has. Now they talk about the paradox. First of all, not dropped, my partner talked about it in his member of government speech. The Fermi paradox is a reaction to the instinctive understanding that of course aliens exist, but we haven't found evidence of that, as we once hadn't found evidence of quarks. It took over 60 years to discover quarks after the first quantum theorists developed the theory. That doesn't mean that they don't exist. People searched for the Higgs boson for over 40 years. Once the belief that these things could exist and the belief that these things did exist if people looked hard enough spurred a great deal of scientific innovation, and then allowed for a great deal of important scientific success. Now moving on to a little bit of anthro-chauvinism. First of all, utilitarianism is net good, so that's not inherently anti-chauvinistic. Furthermore, it includes animals and the environment. It is anti-anthro-chauvinist. Peter Singer, the founder of utilitarianism, is an animal rights activist and a vegan. Okay, now moving on to this idea of why it's inherently valuable to talk about why it's good to believe in aliens, why that does very much matter in this round. That's a point that we've been talking about since the start. They try to frame it out of their way they try to frame their way out of the debate, out of it being in the debate, but that fundamentally does not work because we win on both their burdens and on ours. They don't respond to our burdens, they only win under their burden. You should choose the team that wins in both worlds. All right, first, almost no belief system exists without some reasoning behind it. We give you that scientific reasoning, but it's also incredibly valuable why it's good to believe the things that we believe. Beliefs can also be judged based on their utility to individuals. Science is founded on this. It is more beneficial to believe in something that lines up with what you can observe as you can repeat it. In cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, beliefs are judged based on benefit to the person, not necessarily truth. Truth doesn't exist. It can only be judged based on usefulness. It is useful to believe in science, and so we do. It is useful to believe in what logic holds true, and so we do. You also need to understand which side is a better vote, which world is a better world. And that's really where our innovation point comes in. They tell you that we should simply be giving the money to causes on Earth, which would be fair if they provided a single mechanism about how to guarantee that money would go to similar or similarly valuable causes. I tell you in my first speech about how current funding is going, by and large, to technology and artificial intelligence. And that point goes pretty much clean dropped. That is where the current money is going, and they provide no evidence for why the money that we're currently giving to aliens, which has helped humanity in the past, is bad for people. It is better for humanity if we put that money towards aliens, because that is technology around communication and human survival in other contexts. In order to believe in basic scientific principles, we could not more strongly urge a government ballot. Thank you so much for your time.
Great round, y'all.
Super interesting. I love alien topics.
I know.
Really great debate. I learned a lot too, by the way.
Yeah, this is great. Congrats. I was just saying Joel is worried we're going to turn into the alien tournament because last year the finals topic was also an alien topic. And it is my fault that this is an alien. This is my topic, my fault. He is a little worried, but I'm glad that you
Just
guys
saying, my team is 100% more likely to go if this is the alien tournament.
Oh yeah, this is great. This is better than econ. Wait, I think it's better than econ.
You can also blame me for all the econ topics. You can blame me for both, honestly.
Good and bad. Things next.
So I have it in. Should I go ahead and disclose that and do my RFD? Okay, this was 4-1 in favor of the opposition. And I hated to have to vote on this because both sides did such
Oh wait,
a
wait,
great.
sorry to stop you. The judge who squirreled is gonna go first. The
Oh,
judge
okay,
differently.
okay,
So
perfect.
yeah, that's gonna be Rosie.
Okay.
Hey guys, second time in a row being a squirrel at this tournament, but I think that like I'm sure of my reasoning. I really looked over the ballot. Again, this was a really, really tight round. I didn't really know where it was gonna go. I usually decide rounds like pretty fast, but this one was one that where I like really looked over things, which is rare. So that should be congratulations to both sides. The reason that I chose to side with side government is that they, in my opinion, did win on this probability debate, and it was because of one argument in the member of government speech that I don't think was fully engaged with. I think before I really looked over my flow, so again, maybe this is something that should have been more extended in the PMR, but when I looked over my flow, I realized that the government said, okay, like, yeah, it's 1 in 100 quintillion, but it's like basically to assume that Earth is the only planet that has this type of life on it is the 100 in that is the 1 in 100 quintillion chance. It is not the fact that there's aliens. That makes any sense. I did not articulate it well. I think that Gov could have done a better job by maybe saying how, like, to what degree these 100 quintillion planets have been investigated. Have we just identified them, or have we like looked at a fair number of them? I think that would have really helped your case. I really did like the rhetoric of like, we've never decided anything on a 1 in 100 quintillion chance. I thought that was really compelling. I was definitely siding with you, but then when I looked back, I was like, oh, this is what Gov's saying, and like that makes sense to me. I also really liked this comment that was made in the PMR, again, which might have been new. I was unsure of whether or not it was new, so I just went with it because it wasn't PO'd, and it was that truth is decided based on utility. And then so then this sort of touches both arguments Gov is trying to make. It touches the arguments about whether or not aliens are real, and then it also touches the arguments about whether believing in aliens is a good and useful thing or not. So then I kind of have to evaluate both. So then I kind of turn to the other side of the Gov's case, and I'm like, okay, is believing in aliens something productive? And again, I was really leaning towards op when they were saying, oh, like, why are we wasting so much money on this, yada, yada, yada. But then I get reminded by Gov that there's been a lot of scientific projects that have taken longer than 40 years, which is not that long in the scope of scientific development, but also that, oh my God, I totally lost my train of thought. Oh, yeah, but also that, I do believe that like funding these things is better than any like than some like unknown thing that could be funded, just because Gov's like, yeah, you have no idea where this money will go if it's not going towards this alien research. And then they give me a lot of examples of things that have developed because of this like space research, like rechargeable hearing aids. So I go with that just because there's a lack of evidence on the other side. So yeah, that is why I sided like that. If anybody has questions, you can ask me. But again, I was the squirrel, small minority, so I understand if you guys just want to get to the other judges. So I'll hand it off.
I'm happy to go next. I end up voting neg because I do think that the negation is had on the framing debate at the point in which I think that the MG concedes a lot of like the key analysis they're giving me about what a belief is, what the burden of the affirmation is, what the burden of the negation is. And I think that the AF could have gotten away with winning under this framing had there been more work done in the PMR to explain like that the probability isn't actually that low. But I think that given the way that the negation is framed around, it really does come down to being like pretty substantially about, is this like a belief that they can really, like, I mean, there's a higher burden of proof, right? And I think that since there isn't sufficient work done on like the probability being high out of the PMR, I don't think that given the framing that I'm getting from the negation that I sort of have to buy just because of key concessions, that like I'm able to vote for the AF on that. I do have this argument out of the AF that I think had there been more time spent on it and had it been brought up in the MG, it could have been a great way to answer it. Somewhere on my flow, I have something about like a belief just meaning that it's like reasonable to believe in it. I think like going for reasonability harder like would have definitely been helpful for the affirmation. But I think since the negation has made the burden of the negation to just like not prove the existence of aliens, but just sort of trigger speculation about the existence of aliens, I think that it makes it really easy for the negation to then just get away with saying like, oh, okay, but I mean, we didn't disprove it, but we still win. And then even if I look to this utilitarian framing, I do think that at the very worst, the negation is winning some terminal defense against the AF on a variety of points. So I just end up buying that I can't, really properly believe that aliens exist. Yeah.
I'll be really quick, but plus to what was just said, ultimately, very broadly, the neg side I felt played offense and very well on two fronts. One was the framing of it, and why, for example, what sealed it for me was the when you pointed out that aliens, on the definition of whether aliens meant intelligence, you pointed out that while they said it was just molecules and any life, that wasn't true because they were quoting SETI, which has intelligence in the title. I thought that was so brilliant. So then I bought into your frame. So I thought you won on the framing. And then the second part of it was, just in case, and as the good debaters that you are, you also argued under utilitarianism and rebutted their points very robustly. So very well done. And because you did that two-pronged approach, you definitely sowed a seed of doubt of whether aliens existed at all, which was your burden of proof. Good job. And nice job to Bart as well. Really great debate.
I can go next. And this was just, you guys are just intimidatingly smart. It was very difficult, made my head hurt to try to go through all this. I also wanted to disclose a little fun fact about me. I maybe should have recused myself from this because I actually grew up in Roswell, New Mexico, and my mother was a doctor. It was a former Air Force base, and there was an Air Force hospital that was turned into a rehab hospital where my mother worked. That was supposedly where the alien bodies were taken to be autopsied. But that's just funny that I got this. Anyway, yeah, so it was framed as utilitarianism rather than fact. Very interesting. I guess it's because it's difficult to prove as fact either way. And really, Gov almost had me, but when Up said, look, you're looking at a chance of it's like 1 over 10 to the 18th or something, of 1 over 10^18 or whatever quintillion is, chance that alien like somewhat intelligent life exists, and they haven't found it yet. That really does plant that seed of doubt, and it's a difficult burden there for Gov to prove. Yeah. So I believe government said negative must do okay, I can't read my handwriting here. Prove unreasonable truthfully. Okay, even if we are looking at, if we accept utilitarianism as the framework, okay, and we're looking at the benefits, which would be better treatment of our Earth and non-human animals. I believe Op's point about the primary cause of the disrespect and disregard for the non-human animals is the limits of our rationality and cognition. We give ourselves way too much credit, I think. And there is quite a bit of evolutionary pressure, as I said, to prioritize our species above others. And as far as the research, the other benefits of accepting this as true, yes, a lot of money was spent on that research and some good things came out of it, but we could directly spend that. That was all serendipitous, right? They weren't looking to make hearing aids for astronauts. It just that came from it. But you could use that money on research on Earth. And you know what the other judges said. It's just tough. There's a lot of good material both ways, but I think it was just the preponderance drove me to vote for neg.
I'll go last. I also voted for opposition. I really enjoyed this debate. I think that this was one of those rare rounds that's in that middle Venn diagram of both entertaining and educational. Those are always really enjoyable to adjudicate. So kudos to the two teams for that. I think pretty consistently with Paulina's RFD, the conceded layers of the framework debate that proposition is giving to opposition, I think make this a pretty clear ballot. I just don't hear a lot of responses to the preponderance of evidence over net benefits analysis that comes out in LOC. I think there's pretty good warranting throughout the opposition's case and into the op block for why I should prefer this framework, i.e. That it's most consistent with the scientific method, that it aligns best with logical reasoning. And I think insofar as proposition rebuttal literally tells me word for word that the opposition wins under their own framework, it just becomes a pretty simple ballot for me for the opposition on both the probability analysis that I think they're winning on the first proposition contention, plus, and I think even more importantly, this kind of bottleneck probability analysis that's coming out on the first opposition contention. I think the challenge for proposition here was a lack of commitment and development to the utilitarian kind of like we should adopt beliefs based on what's adaptive or useful. I think that you probably could have made this a much closer round if you had really pushed that a lot further. And there were some interesting articulations of this in PMR with like the analogy to cognitive behavioral therapy. I thought that was like quasi new, maybe not totally new. But I think that it becomes a pretty hard ballot on the util level when so much of the framework debate is being conceded. I think also, like Paulina points out, there's pretty good terminal defense from opposition to most of the utilitarian arguments, maybe even like a bit of a one turn on this argument about like funding trade-off. I do think the PMR is right that it's really unclear kind of like where these funds go. The challenge is that I think the proposition has some reasonably well-developed and terminalized impacts on the utilitarian benefits of funding flowing from like SETI and investment in the kinds of research that proposition would theoretically make more likely. I just don't really hear them again in MG and PMR. And so I wanted more of that to come through over the course of the round to have like a clearer path to signing a ballot on this util debate. So for those reasons, I vote opposition. Congratulations to both of you. It was a really fun and satisfying way, at least from, I think, judges' perspectives to end the tournament, and hope that y'all felt the same as well.
Thanks, everyone.